Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Empty Cloud Monastery. So today is the first day of Vassa. So we'll be talking a bit about the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta. So I'll start by paying homage to the Buddha, and then we'll start going through this discourse. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Namasami. So as mentioned, today is the first day of Vassa, and in many Buddhist monasteries, it's customary to begin the Vassa with reciting the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, so the Buddha's first discourse. And technically speaking, this wasn't the first teaching that the Buddha gave. The Buddha was already instructing the group of 5 disciples in some way prior to this, but this was the first official discourse that's on record. And it's also notable because this was the time when the Buddha laid out a basic framework for the Dhamma, which persisted throughout the entire 45 years of his teaching. And it's also notable because this was the discourse that led the first of his disciples to attain the first stage of awakening. So Venerable Kondanya becomes a stream enterer while listening to this particular Dhamma talk. So the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, it's commonly held forward as a concise summary of Buddhist practice, and it has a particular emphasis on the Four Noble Truths. So the discourse is found in the Samyutta Nikaya, so chapter 56, sutta number 11. And this is one of the charming things about the suttas, is that they're not necessarily arranged in the order you would expect. If you think, oh, it's the first sutta the Buddha gave, well, then it should be the first sutta in the book. But that's not the case. It's buried somewhere in the middle, towards the back of the Samyutta Nikaya. So you kind of have to know where to look in order to find it. But it's in the chapter on the Four Noble Truths, the Satcha Samyutta, which is a chapter containing many short suttas which all are centered around the Four Noble Truths. So the placement of the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, although not chronologically sensical, is perfectly rational in terms of theme. So it's thematically sensible. So the discourse begins, Ekang samayang bhagava para nasyang viharati isipatane megadaye. So the Buddha was living at Varanasi, which modern times is called Benares, at Isipatana in the Deer Park. So this was one of the less common places that the Buddha would give teachings. So most of his Dhamma talks were given in Savatthi. A few were given in Varanasi, and a few were given in various other places. Again, this is notable because Varanasi was where the Buddha gave his first set of teachings, his first instructions. Tatrako Bhagava Panchavagye Bhikkhu Amantesi. So the Buddha addresses the group of 5 bhikkhus. So the group of 5 is referring to the Buddha's first 5 disciples, which were 5 ascetic contemplatives who were the Buddha's companions before he attained awakening. So before the Buddha attained awakening, he spent a long period of time practicing ascetic practices together with other religious seekers. And he had 5 in particular who were his good friends, his good companions. So after the Buddha attained awakening, he thought, who should I teach first? And he thought of first his 2 former teachers, but they weren't available because they had both passed away. So next he thought of his 5 companions, his 5 friends who he had been practicing together with. Because these were people who already had a fairly advanced spiritual practice, but they didn't understand the Dhamma that leads to awakening. So they were already contemplatives, they were ascetics, they were meditators of some sort, but they didn't understand the Buddha Dhamma because there was not yet any Buddha Dhamma. But the Buddha saw that these people were already very close to awakening. They just needed to hear the right concepts, and they would be able to put themselves in the right direction. So he speaks to the group of 5. He says, Dve me bhikkhave anta pabhajitena na sevitabha. He says, monks, these 2 extremes should not be practiced by a renunciate. So the 2 extremes, the Pali word is anta, which literally means end or edge. So the outer edges of something. It says these 2 extremes should not be practiced by a pabhajita. So pabhajita is one who has gone forth, or an exile. Actually, a very literal meaning of pabhajita is exile. So this word is used both to refer to monastics, so people who have willingly exiled themselves from ordinary society to become religious seekers. And it also refers to criminals who have been kicked out of a city or a country for their crimes. So pabhajita means exile, one who is ejected from ordinary society, whether voluntarily, as in the case of the Buddha and his followers, or involuntarily, as in the case of criminals and outcasts. But most commonly in the suttas, the word pabhajita means a monk, whether a Buddhist monk or a monk of another tradition. So the Buddha says there's 2 extremes which should not be practiced by a monk, by a religious seeker. Katamedve, what 2? Yochayang kamesu kamesu kalikanu yogo. So the first one is to be devoted to sensual gratification. So this means seeking out pleasure through sensory experiences. So that's anything eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. So it's constantly seeking out pleasant sights, sounds, smells, tastes, touches, and even thoughts. So it's seeking out the pleasant things in life and being fixated on seeking out the pleasant things. So kamasu kali kanu yogo. So anu yogo means to be devoted to something, committed to something. This is the same root from which we get the word yoga. So yoga has several meanings. In the Pali usage, the word yoga most commonly means either commitment, like something you're committed to, or it means something which ties you down, so something which traps you. So here it actually has both those meanings. So you're committed to seeking pleasure through sensuality, but that also is something that traps you. So often when we encounter double meanings in the Pali texts, the double meaning is intentional. It's because the Buddha is trying to communicate multiple statements with one word. So he says, one should not be devoted or stuck on the pursuit of sensual pleasure. And he says that it is hino. Hina means it's inferior, it's lowly. The word hina literally means like garbage, something that you've thrown out. So it's something worthless. So if you've ever heard the word Hinayana, one, never use that word. It's very rude. But Hinayana literally means the worthless vehicle. It doesn't mean the inferior vehicle. It means the worthless vehicle, the trash, the garbage, that which should be thrown away. So it's a very rude word. Don't use the word Hinayana. So Hina means inferior, lowly, worthless. Gamma, so he says, Hino, Gammo, Potu Janiko, Anaryo, Anati Sanghito. So this is how he's describing devotion to sensual gratification. So it's Hina, it's worthless, it's lowly. It's Gamma. So Gamma comes from the word Gama, which means village. So Gamma means it's what the villagers do. It's what the commoners do. It's what the ordinary folk who hang out in villages do. Potu Janiko. So Potu Janiko is from the word Patujana, which those who are more familiar with Buddhist technical terms might recognize the word Patujana. Patujana is commonly used to mean anyone who has not attained at least the first stage of awakening. But the literal meaning of Patujana is the common folk. So Putu means broad or widespread, and Jana means populace. So Patujana means the general population. So Potu Janiko means this is what the general population does. This is what the common folk do. This is what pretty much everybody does. And next he says it's Anaryo. So Arya means noble. So Anarya means not noble. It's ignoble. There's nothing special here. And finally, he says it's Anatta Sanghito. So Atta means benefit or goal. So either in the ordinary sense of something that's beneficial, but also in a particular meaning of that which leads to the true benefit or the true goal, the highest goal, which is complete awakening. And Sanghita means connected. So Anatta Sanghita means it's not connected with the goal. So it's not beneficial. It doesn't lead to the final goal. It doesn't lead to awakening. So this is the one extreme. The extreme is commitment to pursuing sensual pleasure, which again, the Buddha says it's worthless. It's the behavior of villagers. It's what commonplace people do. It's what most people are caught up in. It's not noble and it's not beneficial. It doesn't lead to awakening. And at this point, the ascetics were probably like, yes, you're right. Being ascetics, they were already quite aware that sensuality was not the path to awakening. And they were, in fact, very devoted ascetics. They were very committed to practicing extreme forms of self-denial and self-torture. So that was something the Buddha knew about them, and it was something he had been doing with them before he set off to find a better way. But then the Buddha says the other extreme. He says yochayang attakilamatanu yogo. The other extreme is to be committed to attakilamata. So kilamata means exhaustion, weariness, being worn out. So attakilamata means self-exhaustion, wearying yourself, wearing yourself out, running yourself ragged. So many of the ascetic practices that were done at the time were things that would push you to the extremes of your limits of physical endurance. So like going around naked in the middle of the winter, or staying in an open field under the hot sun in the middle of the summer, or going for long periods of time without eating and drinking. These were just some of the more mild ascetic practices. There were more that were much more extreme. And elsewhere in the suttas, the Buddha says that those practices only serve to wear out your body. They don't wear out your defilements. They just wear out your physical body. So attakilamata means that which wears yourself out. And he says that these kinds of practices are dukkha, they're painful, anarya, again, ignoble, and anatta sanghita, again, not beneficial. They don't lead to the true goal of complete awakening. So then the Buddha says, Ete ko bhikkhave ubo ante anupagamma. So having gone beyond these two extremes. So anupagamma literally means not getting close to. So not getting close to either of these two extremes. Majjhima patipada tathagatena abhisambuddha. So the moderate path, the path of practice which is moderate. It's in the middle. It's reasonable. So majjhima means middle. So majjhima patipada. We usually translate this as the middle way or the middle path, but I think a better translation would be a moderate path of practice. Path of moderate practice. So moderation means knowing the right amount. It means doing things in the proper amount. So not indulgence. So not always seeking out the most pleasurable and the most comfortable and the most enjoyable experiences. But also not deliberately harming your own body or deliberately harming your own mind. So asceticism does have a place in Buddhism, but asceticism cannot be taken to an extreme where it becomes self-destructive. And similarly, we use pleasant things, but we use them just to the extent that they're supportive to our practice, not to the point where they overwhelm the mind or obsess the mind. And the Buddha says about the Eightfold Path, he says it is Chakkukarani, Jnanakarani. So Chakkukarani means it produces vision. Jnanakarani, it produces knowledge. Upasamaya, it leads to peace, to tranquility. Abhinyaya, it leads to higher knowledge. Sambodhaya, it leads to complete awakening. Nibbanaya sangvatati, and it is conducive for nibbana. It helps one to attain enlightenment, the final purification of mind. So this is the opening remark of this sutta. And this actually is very commonly misunderstood. So the middle way does not mean compromising, but rather it just means that one is not seeking out either physical pleasure or sensual pleasure, and also one is not deliberately wearing out one's body, but rather one is trying to practice in a way that produces vision and knowledge, peacefulness and awakening. And so then the Buddha says, and what is this middle path? He says, it is just this Noble Eightfold Path. So ayameva aryo attangiko maggo. So the Noble Eightfold Path, which he says is sammaditthi. So a correct perspective, a right understanding of things. And sammaditthi is, in many ways, it's the basic foundation of Buddhist practice. The Buddha said that sammaditthi is the forerunner of all wholesome states. So you first need to have the right view of knowing what's wholesome and what's unwholesome, of knowing what leads to awakening and what leads away from awakening. So the very first thing is right view. It's studying the Buddha's teachings, contemplating the Buddha's teachings, discussing the Buddha's teachings, reading the suttas cover to cover, all of them. And reflecting deeply on their meaning, and then trying to see it in your own life. Next is samma sankappa, so the right attitude. So the three attitudes that the Buddha recommends are the attitude of renunciation. So this actually is a critical part of Buddhism, renunciation. Even if you're a layperson, you should be trying to incorporate renunciation into your life. Letting go of the things you're attached to. Being content with little, being content with the bare minimum. And if you don't even get the bare minimum, well, be content with that. And next is the attitude of non-cruelty and the attitude of non-harming. So cultivating a mind of universal loving kindness and compassion. Next, samma vaca, right speech. This just means speaking truthfully, gently, beneficially, at the right time, at the right place, speaking words that are valuable, that are worth treasuring, that help people make progress towards awakening. Samma kammanta, this means right action. So trying not to hurt people with our bodies, and instead seeing what we can do to help people. Sama ajiva, so right livelihood or right business, right occupation. So this means that we should engage in a means of work which is harmless, which doesn't hurt any living being, and optimally a means of work which is beneficial, which supports living beings. And sama vayama is right effort. So this is the constant effort to remove unwholesome mind states and cultivate wholesome mind states from our own mind. Sama sati, so right mindfulness. And for this, it's really important to read the Satipatthana Sutta for more detail. But briefly speaking, right mindfulness is to be clearly aware of your own body and mind, and to recognize it as impermanent and impersonal. And sama samadhi, which means the correct concentration or unification of mind. And sama samadhi is defined as the 4 jhanas. So it's learning how to collect, unify, stabilize, and focus the mind. And it's necessary for sama samadhi to also have sati, to also have mindfulness. So for concentration to be right concentration, it must be accompanied by a sharp, clear, precise mindfulness. So the Buddha says this is the middle path that the Buddha spoke about. So this Majjhima Patipada, this middle path or this moderate path of practice, it's not about compromising. In fact, it's about an uncompromising commitment to the Noble Eightfold Path. So this is what the Buddha means by the Majjhima Patipada, the middle way. Because, I mean, you hear all kinds of crazy ideas about what people think Majjhima Patipada means, the middle path or the middle way, what they think it means. But actually, the Buddha is very clear. He says the middle path is an unwavering, deep commitment to the Noble Eightfold Path. That's what it is. Then next, the Buddha starts going through the 4 Noble Truths. He says, Erongko panabhikkhave dukkhaṃ arya satcham. He says, this is the Noble Truth of dukkha. It says, Jatipi dukkha, birth is dukkha. Jarapi dukkha, decay is dukkha. So jara, it's often translated as aging or as old age. And that's one way of taking it. But the word jara more literally means decay, decrepitude. So things becoming weak and frail and incapacitated. So losing their functionality over time. Which is a more profound thing than just aging. So aging is neutral, but decaying is negative. So jarapi dukkha, some texts at this point have vyadipi dukkha, so sickness is suffering. Maranampi dukkhang, dying is also dukkha. Apiye sampiyogo dukkho, so to be in contact with things you dislike is dukkha. Piyehi vipayogo dukkho, to be separated from the things you like is dukkha. Yam pichang nalabati tampi dukkhang, and not getting what you want is dukkha. That's sort of a brief summary of all of these, actually. Not getting what you want is dukkha. And then sankatena panchupadana kanda dukkha, it says, and briefly, the 5 components of body-mind, when affected by grasping or clinging, is dukkha. So here's a brief summary of this first noble truth. He's talking about how our experience of the world is marked by dissatisfaction, discontent. And it's because we don't like the painfulness of birth, decay, sickness, and death. We don't like to be stuck with things we find unpleasant. We don't like to be separated from things we find pleasant. We don't like it when we don't get what we want. But actually, he says fundamentally the problem is whenever there's any kind of clinging or grasping related to any of the components of body and mind. Fundamentally, that's the cause of our suffering. Which then is the second noble truth. The Buddha says, Erongko panabhikkhave dukkha samudayang arya satchang. So this is the noble truth of the arising of dukkha. So what's causing this dukkha? says Yayang Tanha Pono Bhavika. He says that craving, which is Pono Bhavika, which leads to continued existence, Nandi Raga Sahagata, which is accompanied by delight and lust, or delight and desire, raga. Tatra Tatra Binandani, which is always seeking delight in various places, always looking for things to delight in. Sayatidang, that is Kama Tanha, the craving for sensuality. Bhava Tanha, the craving for states of being. And Vibhava Tanha, the craving to be separated from states of being. So these three basic kinds of craving. So Kama Tanha is the most basic, craving for any kind of sensual experience. Bhava Tanha is the craving to be something. And this can either just be a general craving to exist as an individual, or it can be craving to be something in particular. Such as, I want to be an architect, or I want to be respected, or I want to be in California, like whatever form of being you might want to be, or I want to be a cat, or I want to be an angel, or whatever. It's all Bhava Tanha. Then Vibhava Tanha is wanting to avoid states of being. And again, this can either be in the most general sense of wanting to just cease to exist entirely, like I want to not exist anymore. Or it can be specific, like I want to stop being that kind of thing. I want to stop existing in that way. So these are the three main categories of craving. So it's wanting either a sensual experience, or wanting to be something, or wanting to not be something. And the Buddha says this is the cause of all of our suffering, these three kinds of craving. Then he says, Edang kopana bhikkhave dukkha nirodhang arya satchang. And he says, this is the noble truth of the cessation of dukkha. So this is how there can be no more dukkha, no more suffering. This is how you can be truly happy. He says, Yo tassa yeva tanhaya asesa viraga nirodo. So he says, when of that craving, there is the remainderless cessation through dispassion. So asesa viraga nirodo. So asesa means no remainder, or complete, with nothing left over. Viraga means dispassion. In some translations, you'll see this translated as fading, but I find that highly unlikely because all throughout the suttas, the word viraga simply means dispassion. So I always find it peculiar when it's rendered as fading in any place. I've actually never found any place in the suttas where viraga clearly means fading. Everywhere I see this word, it has the meaning of dispassion. So viraga nirodha means cessation through dispassion, or cessation caused by dispassion, which is very much in line with how the Buddha normally uses the word viraga. For example, he says, Nimiddang virajati viraga vimuchati. So viraga vimuchati. So viraga, dispassion, causes liberation. So this is how the Buddha normally talks about the path of practice. So viraga leads to the cessation of one's defilements, the cessation of one's craving. So that's what he's saying here. So viraga nirodha means the cessation of craving through cultivating dispassion. Chago means to let go of something, so letting go of one's craving. Patinissaga means to completely relinquish something, to drop it, put it down completely. Mutti means to release, and analio means not sticking, not adhering to. So there's the complete cessation of craving through dispassion, letting go, relinquishment, releasing, and non-adherence. So this is how there can be freedom from suffering. This is how there can be true happiness. Then he says, Edanko panabhikkhave dukkha nirodha gamani patipada arya satchang. And this is the noble truth of the path of practice, which leads to the cessation of dukkha. That is this Eightfold Path, this Noble Eightfold Path. And again, he lists right view, right attitude, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. So at this point, there's one more bit on the Four Noble Truths, and then I think we'll wrap up there, and I'll take any questions, and I'll finish up the rest of the discourse tomorrow. So then the Buddha goes through each of the Four Noble Truths, and he gives a similar statement for each one. So he starts off, Edang dukkang arya satchantime bhikkhave, pube ananusutesu dhammesu chakkhung udapati jnanang udapati panya udapati vijja udapati aloko udapati. So he says, so this understanding, like this is the noble truth of dukkha. This is what dukkha is. So he says, previously I didn't know this. So pube ananusutesu, I'd never heard this before. Nobody had ever told this to me before. And so the Buddha had gone to all the great spiritual teachers at the time, and none of them had taught him anything like this. So he says, I never heard this teaching before. But now that I know it, he says, Chakkhung udapati, so vision appeared in me. Jnanang udapati, knowledge appeared in me. Panya udapati, wisdom appeared in me. Vijja udapati, understanding appeared in me. Aloka udapati, light appeared in me. So he said, in this way, there was this clear understanding of like, oh, this is what dukkha is. It's this craving, this clinging to body and mind. It's this constant seeking after what we can't get. This is what's causing our suffering. And then he says, Tanko panidang dukkang arya satchang parinyayang. He says, then he realized this dukkha needs to be fully known. Parinyaya means it should be completely known. So this is important because the Buddha is saying we should not ignore our suffering or turn away from our suffering, but we should look directly at it and know it fully and completely. Because it's only through fully and completely knowing our dukkha that we're able to transcend it. And then the third one, he says, Tanko panidang dukkang arya satchang parinyatang. So he says, then he understood, I have completely known this dukkha. So the Buddha looked at his own dukkha, thoroughly examined it, and came to know it completely. Then he applies a similar three-part analysis to the second noble truth. He says, Edang dukkha samudayang arya satchantime. So then I knew this is the cause of suffering. This is what's causing all of our dukkha. It's this craving. And he says, Tanko panidang dukkha samudayang arya satchang pahatabang. So this craving needs to be discarded. Pahataba means it should be thrown away, should be discarded, rejected. Which, by the way, ha-taba, that's actually from the same root as hina. So pahataba means to throw something away, to throw out the trash. So you see the craving in your mind, and you throw it away. You see it's trash. And he says, Tanko panirang dukkha samudayang arya satchang pahinang. So then he himself completely discarded his craving. He threw it away because he had seen it as useless. And then the third noble truth, Edang dukkha nirodang arya satchang. So he clearly saw that there is the possibility for dukkha to come to an end. That through relinquishing craving, it's possible to experience true happiness. And he says, Tanko panidang dukkha nirodang arya satchang sachikatabang. So he says the cessation of dukkha is something which is to be realized. So sachikataba literally means to see with your own eyes. So it means a direct personal experience of something. So he says the cessation of dukkha is something that's to be directly, personally experienced. It's to be known for yourself through your own direct experience. In other words, we should be actively looking in our experience for the cessation of dukkha. When does dukkha disappear? When is it absent? And we'll notice that whenever we let go of some of our desires and attachments, then we also let go of some of our dukkha. So in this way, we can see dukkha nirodha for ourselves. Every moment that we practice the path, we can drop a little bit of our dukkha, seeing the dukkha diminishing because we've diminished our craving. So that's the direct knowing of the third noble truth. And you can do this in every moment. You don't have to wait until you're fully awakened. You can get glimpses of the third noble truth every time you let go of some craving. And then the Buddha realized, Tanko panidang dukkha nirodhang arya sachang sachikatanti. So he says, then he realized, then he knew that he had seen dukkha nirodha for himself. He knew that he had directly experienced the ending of dukkha, the cessation of dukkha. And the fourth noble truth, idang dukkha nirodha gamini patipada arya sachang. So then he directly understood what needs to be done in order to bring suffering to an end. So he directly understood the Noble Eightfold Path. He understood how to develop and train one's mind so that one's dukkha will come to an end. And again, he realized, Tanko panidang dukkha nirodha gamini patipada arya sachang bhave tabang. So bhave tabang means it should be practiced, it should be cultivated, it should be developed. It needs to be brought into being. So you need to make an effort to practice the Eightfold Path. And this might seem like a trite statement, but it's actually very important because at the time of the Buddha, there were many spiritual teachers who were fatalists or determinists. So teachers who believed that you didn't actually have to do anything in order to attain awakening. You just had to wait. And if your fate is right, then eventually you will just attain awakening automatically. Or predeterminism, this idea that it's your course in life is set. You don't actually make any choices, and everything is predetermined. This was also a belief that many people had. But the Buddha took a very clear standpoint in saying that no, you actually have to make an effort. If you want to attain awakening, you need to make an effort to practice the spiritual path, which culminates in awakening. And then again, reflecting on his own mind, he realized, Tanko panidang dukkha nirodha gamini patipada arya sachang bhavitang. He realized this path which leads to the end of suffering has been developed within me. It has been fully practiced. So these were the four realizations that the Buddha had. Let's see, and I don't see any questions showing up in the chat, so I might actually just keep going with the discourse. We might even get through all of it today. So the Buddha, he then says, Yavaki vanchame bhikkhave ime suchatusu arya sachesu evang te parivatang dvadasakarang yatabhutang jnanadasanang nasuvisudang ahosi. He says, monks, as long as regarding these four noble truths in this three-part examination, so for a total of 12 factors. So 3 factors for each of the four noble truths. So as long as I did not have a completely pure knowledge and vision of the Four Noble Truths in these 3 ways, so this 12-part examination of the Four Noble Truths, he says, Neva tava hang bhikkhave sadeva ke loke samara ke sabrahma ke sasamana brahmanya pajaya sadeva manusaya. He says, I did not, in this world with all its angels and demons and brahmas and all its contemplatives and priests and all these people. He says, I did not declare in this world, anuttarang sama sambodhing abhisambuddho, that I had attained complete perfect awakening. So he says, as long as I had not yet fully understood the Four Noble Truths in this way, then I did not claim to have attained awakening. But then he says, Yato chiko me bhikkhave. He says, but when I had realized the Four Noble Truths in this way, he says, atahang bhikkhave. So then I did make the claim to having attained complete perfect awakening. So here the Buddha is making this statement. He's saying that if one has not yet fully realized the Four Noble Truths in this three-part examination, then one cannot claim to be awakened. And it's only through the complete and thorough understanding of the Four Noble Truths that awakening is possible. And then the Buddha says his victory cry of attaining awakening. He says, Jnana chapaname dasanang udapati. He says, knowledge and vision arose in me. Akupa me vimutti. So my liberation is unshakable. In other words, once one has attained awakening, there's no way to lose it. It's permanent. It can't be lost. Ayamantima jati. So this is my final birth. In other words, the Buddha saw that he would not be stuck in the cycle of rebirth ever again. Natti dani punabhavoti. So there will not now be any renewed existence. So again, he saw, I'm not going to be reborn again. So he was free from the cycle of samsara, the painful cycle of birth and death. It says, Idamavocha Bhagava, this is what the Buddha said, Attamana Panchavagya Bhikkhu Bhagavato Basitang Abhinandong. And satisfied, the 5 monks delighted in the Blessed One's speech. And most suttas would end at this point, but this discourse has a little bit more. Next it says, Is imasmincha panaveya karanasming banyamane ayasmito kondanya savirjang vitamalang dhammacakkappavattana udapati. So when this explanation was being given, in Venerable Kondanya, the stainless, spotless vision of the Dhamma appeared. So in other words, the Venerable Kondanya had this clear vision of Dhamma. He clearly saw the Dhamma. And what he clearly saw was, Yang Kinchi Samudaya Dhammang, so whatever has the nature to arise, Sabantang Nirodha Dhammang, all has the nature to cease. So this is the critical realization of a stream enterer. Yang Kinchi Samudaya Dhammang, Sabantang Nirodha Dhammang. Everything that comes into being also ceases to exist. So that means everything is impermanent. This was his realization while listening to the Buddha's Dhamma talk. And he became a stream enterer. So this is what it means when we say that Dhammacakkappavattana udapati, the Dhamma eye, or the vision of the Dhamma appeared. It means the person has attained the first stage of awakening. Then the discourse continues. It says, Pavati te chapana bhagavata Dhammacakke. So when the Buddha had set in motion the wheel of Dhamma, so in other words, when he had taught this Dhamma discourse, the Bhuma Deva Sadamanu Savesong, so the earth devas, so the spirits of the earth, announced, Etang Bhagavata Bara Nasyang Isipatane Megadaye. So this blessed one at Varanasi, in the deer park at Isipatana, Anutarang Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, has set in motion the unsurpassable Dhamma wheel. So in other words, he started teaching the highest Dhamma, the greatest form of Dhamma. Appativatyang samanena va brahmanena va devena va marena va brahmana va kena jiva lokasming. And it says, and it cannot be stopped by anyone in the world, like any contemplative or priest or angel or demon or deity or anyone at all. Nobody can stop this. So this is what the earth spirits called out. They're like, oh, this is amazing. This person has attained full awakening. He's taught people how to attain awakening. He's set in motion the highest Dharma, and nothing can stop it now. It does eventually wear out in time, by the way, but it can't be forcibly stopped. So then and it goes up here, so it goes through many different layers of the heaven realms. So with each layer of heaven beings hearing the previous one and repeating the announcement, so the next ones up can hear. They're kind of like passing the message up through the heavens. So from the earth spirits, then it goes to the Chatum Maharajika Deva, the devas of the 4 great kings. From them it goes to the Yama Devas, the Tusita Devas, the Nimanarati Devas, the Paranimita Vasavati Devas, the Brahmakayika Devas, so all the way up to the Brahma world. This message is spread. And it says, then the discourse says, Iti hatena kanena, yatena mahutena. So at that time, Yava Brahma Loka Saddo Abugachi. So as far as the Brahma world, the report was spread. Ayancha Dasa Sahasi Loka Datu, Sankampi Sampakampi Sampavedi. So it says, and then the whole world system trembled and shook and quaked. So there was a trembling all throughout the world because something so dramatic and massive had happened. Something so rare and precious had happened. It says, Apamano cha ularo obaso loke patra hosi. And then a sublime, magnificent light appeared in the world. So ulara means magnificent or sublime. And I should point out, by the way, that there's a typo in some printings of the sutta. So ularo means like magnificent or sublime. But sometimes it's miswritten as olaro, which means like coarse or gross or unsubtle. So almost the opposite meaning. So it should be ularo, like sublime, magnificent. So it says this sublime, magnificent light arose in the world, atikama devanu devanubhava. So surpassing even the glory of the devas, of the angels. So this is the light of the Dhamma, the light of the Buddha's teachings. It says, Atiko Bhagava emang udanang udanesi. So then the Buddha made this statement, this proclamation. Anyasi vatabo kandanyo, anyasi vatabo kandanyo. So he says, oh, how wonderful. Kondanya has understood. So I actually really feel the Buddha on this one, because when the Buddha first attained awakening, his actual first thought was like, oh, this is too subtle. This is going to be really hard for anyone to understand this Dhamma. I mean, it was so difficult for me. It's going to be really hard for others as well. So on this time, finally, he's been trying to teach the group of 5 for who knows how long at this point. And finally, one of them understood. And he's like, oh, at last, somebody understood what I'm talking about. Kondanya understood. And it says, Iti rang ayasmito kondanyasa, anya kondanyo twevanamanga hosi. So then from that point onward, Venerable Kondanya was called Anya Kondanya. So Kondanya who knows, Kondanya who understood. And in some texts that's written as Anyasi Kondanya or Anyata Kondanya. But it all has the same meaning. It means Kondanya who understood, Kondanya who knew. So that's the end of the discourse. So this went quicker than expected. Let's see. I see there's a couple questions. So first we'll respect the sutta with 3 sadhus, and then I'll start answering the questions. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So we have some questions here. So first off, Sunma Karma Swaipa says, thank you for defining Hinayana. Yeah, it's a minor point, but it is important to point out that sometimes people think that Hinayana is another word for Theravada, but actually that's not correct at all. So Theravada is not Hinayana. Hinayana refers to people who are practicing with a self-centered viewpoint, and in particular in the Mahayana text, it's defined as someone who believes that the self is a permanent, ongoing entity, or to people who believe that objects have a genuine, solid reality to them. So these are both ideas which are flatly rejected by the Pali Buddhist texts. So it's, Hinayana is definitely not talking about Theravada. So an important point to keep in mind. And Sud says, craving is tough to let go, but is Buddha saying here that as long as one follows the Eightfold Path, he will eventually automatically let go of craving and hence dukkha? Yes. If you follow the Noble Eightfold Path with depth, completeness, and profundity, then yes, you will let go of all craving. So that means that you actually need to fully, deeply investigate right view. as well as practicing all the moral teachings. It means you need to constantly practice right effort, which means always purifying your mind from unwholesome states and always developing wholesome mind states. And it means constantly practicing right mindfulness, and it means developing very strong samadhi. So practicing the Eightfold Path is actually a big deal. It's not a small thing. So it says, so it's not like we need to let go of craving and follow the Eightfold Path, but rather following the Eightfold Path and eventually we will be free of craving. Yeah, the purpose of the Eightfold Path is to help us let go of craving. Yeah, that's what it does. And Naval asks, why did the Buddha teach right livelihood to the ascetics? How does it apply to them? So first off, the Buddha was giving a complete teaching here. So he was probably also thinking that this was a teaching which would be remembered and passed on. And so it was important that it be complete. Not that it apply only to the people he was talking to, but it had to be something which was timeless, relevant to everyone. But also right livelihood, there's actually a whole section in the suttas on right livelihood for monastics. So there are ways where someone, even as a monastic, might be engaging in a way of making a living which is not quite blameless, which is not quite harmless. So it applies to them as well. So just because someone's a monk doesn't mean they're automatically practicing right livelihood. You still have to make an effort to practice right livelihood. And that's the last of the questions. Do you have any questions? No? Okay. So looks like that's it for the morning. So we'll go ahead and end it this time with 3 more sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we'll